Is that one thing I think all of you are aware that at least most of you would call this Armistice Day. Well, it was Armistice Day 100 years ago, because today, if you weren't aware of it, it's 100 years since, actually November 11th, since World War I ended. This is actually the day the war ended 100 years ago. But in 1954, they changed it to Veterans Day, and to make it all inclusive with all the groups we have. Because now, I wouldn't want to name all the battles or groups all the way down to Afghanistan. That's probably where I'd stop, or Iraq. I think we go beyond that. The one thing about veterans is the fact that right now there are about 16 million veterans alive, and about 500,000 are World War II. 1 out of every 4 veterans that came back from, or actually 1 out of every 4 right now that's a veteran, we think that they had to serve overseas. A veteran necessarily is not a military veteran that served overseas. A veteran could be a veteran that served in the United States, which 1 out of 4 did, the ones that are living today. So they had a function in the state where they took care of maybe some disaster or worked at an embassy or something like that. So men and women are veterans even if they haven't been overseas in combat. And that's a good thing to know. Of all the veterans that come back from the, is it shut off, Jim or Dan? The veterans that came back from Afghanistan and Iraq, 1 out of 5 has got a problem because of a head injury or because of PTSD or another mental problem. So the veteran problems that we have in this country probably aren't being addressed as they should be by the government, and that's part of the problem. But nevertheless, we hope that it will be, and we hope that we just probably don't have to have a society that's going to be just continuing being built up by veterans, because someday there should be peace, that we shouldn't have veterans, but we'll still have military people. That would be fine. And just to deviate a little bit, we could talk all day about veterans, and we should, but there's only so much you can really say unless you get into the life of a veteran. And I really am uncomfortable doing it, but I think to let many understand what a veteran does, and each veteran is different. Every veteran's got a different story to tell. I may be telling part of mine, but it doesn't necessarily mean that every veteran's going to be the same. First of all, I'd just like to say that I am a 21 and a half years veteran, military veteran. You may not realize that, but I've been in the military for 21 and a half years. That's regular Army and reserve time. So I'm a little bit familiar with the military, but the military has sure changed. So what I'll be speaking of, some of you older veterans may understand, and the newer veterans may not understand, because it seems the whole concept has changed quite a bit as far as the structure and the organization of the Army. But anyhow, just to show you how things change, when I was drafted, I tried to enlist because no way was I ever going to get in the infantry. That's the last place I was ever going to be. I tried to enlist the Air Force. I didn't want to be a pilot. I wanted to be a navigator because I kind of liked math. I couldn't make it because I had glasses. My eyes weren't there. So then I thought, well, the Navy looks pretty good. It's a little bit safer. So I tried to get in the Navy. And those days, everything was signals, flags. I was colorblind, I found out. So I went home. In 2 weeks, they drafted me. But anyhow, when I went into service, I was lucky. Kind of they take you as an individual. But I started out, and I'll give you a quick synopsis of my service. I was in the Coast Artillery. I was in the engineers. I was in the armor, or the tanks for 18 years. And then all of a sudden, I was lucky. They put me in the infantry. I didn't have a choice. I ended up, I'd like to just explain a little bit to some of you that may have forgotten or may not know about the structure and the composition of the Army. The structure is such that the smallest unit is what they call a squad. The squad, that's 10 men roughly. It can be up or down. Above a squad, you have 3 or 4 squads in a platoon. A platoon is usually about 30, anywhere close 30 to 40 people. Above, then you have 3 platoons or 4 platoons, maybe sometimes 5 platoons in a company. This is an infantry company, infantry I'm speaking about. And then that's roughly, can be 120 men, 140. Then you can have 4 companies in a battalion. A battalion is roughly, with 4 companies could be 4 companies in a battalion. And we have 3 battalions in a regiment. So a regiment then there are 3, I'm not going to give numbers anymore, but basically a regiment can run about 4,500 people or 4,000 or somewhere in there, depends on what type it is. You have 3 regiments in a division, divisions go into brigades, brigades go into corps, corps go into armies. That's kind of the structure. When you get to the individual soldier, I'm speaking about a soldier, a lot of times the Marines are pretty much alike as far as rank goes, but the Navy has their own rank, and the Coast Guard has their own, and the Air Force kind of follows or has the same rank as the Marines and the regular Army. The lowest unit is a private. You all heard about private. A private has no stripe. He's got a blank arm. You don't have a stripe. The next step is a PFC, Private First Class. That's a 1-striper. The next one above that is a corporal. That's a 2-striper. The next one above that is a buck sergeant, 3-striper. Above a buck sergeant is a staff sergeant. That's a 3-striper. I think you've got one pure with an arc underneath. And above a staff sergeant are 2 arcs. And that's a tech sergeant. Above a tech sergeant is a master sergeant or a sergeant first class. And then they have what they call a field sergeant and why did that happen? Because every company or every unit, just like if you work for somebody, there are only so many slots of each. There's so many privates, so many PFCs, so many corporals, so many, depends on the unit, so many sergeants, but only 1 first sergeant. And that's the way your structure goes. Well, anyhow, getting into combat, before we got there, I'm leaving the States. I'm going to Could you just screw that one for me, please? I'm leaving the States, and we're going to Europe. I was sent to Europe. Yeah, thank you. And we get on a ship. In those days, it was a victory ship. If you know what a victory ship is, that wasn't the best ship. They were built, and I might be wrong, but I think they used to build one victory ship a day. That was Kaiser's shipyard. So we were on that kind of ship. You didn't want to be on that if you ever got attacked, because they sunk like a rock. One of the others, it took our regiment. I was in, again, like I say, I didn't say that. I was in the anti-tank company of the 407th Regiment of the 102nd Infantry Division. That was my title, not my title, but unit I was in. So when we shipped over, we went in a convoy. The 407th had two ships. I was on the Marine Wolf, which was a victory ship. And the only thing I'll say about that is we didn't land in England. We landed in the English Channel outside of Cherbourg. And then we left the ship. And I say left the ship. You know what a cargo net is? It's that rope net about the squares are about about a foot each way is a square. They throw that overboard, and you climb down with your pack and with your gun and everything on your back. So you're up there in that ship, and you're down here going either to a barge or to a boat. Well, you've all been in a lake. When you get to the dock, you know what happens with your boat. You want to get into the dock. Well, here you're coming down in this net with all this stuff on your back, and this thing you're supposed to get into is going maybe this far or further than that away from the boat, and you got to time it so you drop right in when it's next to the boat. Otherwise, you're going to get pinched or sink like a rock because you don't have your flotation device on. That was about the scariest thing I did, at least up to that point. But anyhow, we get into, we landed at Cherbourg, which is on a Normandy peninsula. It was raining cats and dogs. I tell you, by the time we got there, it was wet. Not wet, it was muddy, I mean. And we just had to pitch a tent right there because it was on a side hill, and the water actually was running down the side of the hill. It wasn't just raining. I tell you, I could have just well died right there as far as I was concerned. That was it. But anyhow, we made it. And if you remember seeing the movie, I don't know the name of it, but I've forgotten, where the parachutist was hanging up in the church steeple. Well, yeah, that's the town we were in, next to it, about a mile out. It was about a mile out. St. Mihiel was the name of that town. And we just were there because once it takes a while before you jump into combat because you aren't ready. They got to take this, everybody's got to get their equipment together and all of that. And it takes about 2-3 weeks at the quickest. So we went into an area just temporarily, and then they took us out and we relieved the 29th Infantry Division. That's the unit that stormed the beaches at Omaha Beach. We relieved them. The way the Army works, or most armies work, it's kind of a past, not past history, but armies work units like in three, just like we work three. There'd be 3 armies, 2 up front, 1 in reserve. And usually 1 up front and the 1 in pass through. And if things are going tough, then you call up the reserve, they go through. But that's basically the way we operated. Excuse me, I kind of get a dry mouth. But anyhow, when we relieved the 29th Division, I was in kind of, if you don't mind me saying, we called it a bastard outfit. And the only reason, if you know what I mean by a bastard, we were kind of alone. We were really never with another group. If they needed they needed a squad or a platoon, they would pull us out and put us there wherever they needed. That's kind of the way I spent my military life. But anyhow, we relieved the 29th Division in a little town by the name of Hatteras. Hatteras stuck out on a salient in the line, if you know what I mean by a salient. In other words, it's a little town, and the lines normally go like, parallel, and you got, they go in and out. But we were sitting out kind of with fields on three sides of us, and we're there for about 2 weeks. In those early days, things didn't go very fast. If you took a half a mile or a quarter mile, you might have it one day, and the next day the enemy would take it back. And that happened fairly often. But anyhow, we were sitting there by ourselves, basically, for about 2 weeks. Because we jumped, when I came, we jumped in somebody else's foxhole that they had dug. And that's the way we stayed. And you remember, we didn't have radios in those days. We had wire, telephone wire. They have a roll about a half a mile of wire. And we could run that between our little foxholes. And one thing we learned, not learned, but I guess we did learn, the worst time for all of us is when you're a green troop. You don't know anything. Nobody's there to tell you anything. And that's when you have your casualties. Well, we were relieved by the British. Actually, I was under the British command for about 3-4 weeks, just about the time of the Bulge. But anyhow, they relieved us, and it was this little town. We didn't have many troops. All I knew in this little town is that us 10 guys, I knew we were there, and there must have been another squad or two at the most from the infantry, what we call a line company. But we pulled out because the British relieved us. The British, when they came in with their squad, they walked right down the middle of the street. They had hobnail boots on, you could see them. The streets were these rock streets, like, big rock or brick. You could see the sparks fly off the bottom, and they had the flat helmets, World War II helmets. That's who relieved us. But the point I was going to make, the first day I was in combat, we aren't all Rambos. Nobody's shooting. Everybody think everybody's shooting at everything. I had 7 rounds of ammunition, 7. You know what a round is? That's 1 bullet. That's how I came into combat. And I had that for at least 2 days. The first hand grenade I got, I picked up by myself. Somebody else had dropped it. We just were, it's a good thing, because for green troops, if they would have given us all ammunition, we'd have shot up the whole world. And that's what it amounted to, because you could see that happen every time you got a green guy. Well, we'd shot ourselves. It was really bad. And that's what did go on. But anyhow, we got relieved, and we went back for a couple of weeks to reorganize. So when we went back, when we got reorganized, they put us on a 40 and 8. You know what a 40 and 8 is? That's those little trains they call. We left from Valognes, France, to Tongres, I think it was Belgium they call it. Where we went into combat was right where Holland and Belgium and Germany came together. So it took us 2 days on that train. In fact, you could jump out of the boxcar and run alongside of it, and you could go faster than the train. But the big thing is, the Army didn't have trucks. The train is sitting around, and you could load up a lot of people, and they jammed us in these boxcars for overnight in 2 days. But anyhow, we made it. But you aren't too happy thinking you're going to get strafed in a train. That was always a worry. But anyhow, when we got there, then we started to get really into the depth of combat, if you want to say that. So that was different as far as you might be in a town for 2 weeks if you were in a defensive, or if they had a straightened line, or you might have been there overnight or half a day. But in the meantime, we were getting kicked back and forth with some of the units because, you know, the enemy knocked you out. And invariably, if you had an attack and as soon as it was over, if you won, not won, but if you pushed them out, invariably there'd be a counterattack within about 2 hours afterwards. So they'd be trying to kick you out. And that was the difference. If they kicked you out, you come back the next morning. So that was really a big change. But what happened at that time, then things were going pretty slow till we crossed what they call the Roar River. Now, I don't know if that's the same as what we call Roar, R-U-H-R, but this is one they call R-O-E-R. And I think it's the same because it's in their industrial belt, like around Dusseldorf and Essen and that particular area where all their heavy industry is. But we were in that particular area, and once we broke out of that, when I say broke out, that we took out, we had one area where our unit was, that the enemy was in the east side of the river, we were on the west side of the river, and it stayed that way for quite a while. The first 3-4 months after the invasion, you know, the Allies didn't get very far. They're lucky they got 30 miles or 40 miles in. They didn't get that far even, because it was just tough going. But once we crossed that river, and on crossing that river, I had a machine gun. Myself and one other guy had a machine gun. We were on top of the dike, and the dike was probably, a good 8-10 feet above the water. And the river was really a fast current, because what happened the first time we were going to cross the river, they opened the dikes, opened the floodgates upstream somewhere, and they flooded the river so bad it took 2 weeks before it went down before we could try to cross again. But I covered the troops as they went across with their assault boats. You know, it'd be 10 guys plus 2 engineers in the boat. Be a squad in each flat bottom boat, and they'd paddle across the river. Well, we jumped off at 3 o'clock. I started shooting at 3 o'clock in the morning. 3:30, the engineers were supposed to start crossing in the boat. So we provided cover fire for them because we knew there was they told us at least there's a enemy bunker there and we should be shooting there. So we just provided cover fire. But the thing is, I don't think I'll ever not see, but imagine trying to build a footbridge across when the enemy's got it zeroed in. Here I'd like to talk about zeroing in. When we were, any place we were in the front line, and when I say front line, there's nobody between me and the enemy. There's a difference between being in a combat zone or a front line. Everybody's pretty much in a combat zone to some degree if you get within 5-10 miles of the front line or more. But anyhow, there was nobody in between. So usually I was in the front line, and my machine gun, there was nobody ahead of that. And if they weren't standing up when we got done shooting. But anyhow, that's the way it kind of worked. But what I'm trying to point out is a footbridge is probably 18 inches wide. They call it a footbridge, and maybe about every, I don't know, about 8 feet or so, you got a steel post, and they got a rope on one side. So that's your footbridge. And the foot troops try to go across that footbridge. Well, the river Roar was at least as wide or wider than the river Crookston. And they had opened the floodgates so the velocity of the river was such that it was really moving. Well, they knocked out that footbridge with mortar shells 3 times before we could. So by the time they got a footbridge in, they start to cross it, they knock it out, and there'd be guys on the footbridge with their packs, and they'd fall in the river. They were gone. There's no way you could keep those guys out. That happened 3 times. I was sitting right, My machine gun was right above where the footbridge, where they're going across. I was on the second story of a house that was built into the dike. But anyhow, we finally crossed the river. Once we crossed the Roar River, then we were heading for the Rhine. That made a big difference. Up to this point, we didn't see any civilians. The civilians left. You can imagine they'd left. They weren't in the area when we came there. So they were going east, it's the same way we were going, but far enough west, the Russians were coming west and going west, so the population was getting squeezed in between. Well, they didn't really get squeezed till we crossed the Rhine, pretty much. That's when we started running into civilians. And that created a different problem as far as fighting goes. And in between, you've heard about labor camps, you've heard about death camps, you've heard about concentration camps. They're all a little bit different. We actually liberated many labor camps. And when I speak of DPs means displaced persons. Most of those displaced persons were Polish, Russian, Hungarian, some French, maybe some Romanian, a rare time there'd be some Italians, but basically most of them were Polish and Russian DPs. Well, you know, what are you going to do with them when all of a sudden you run into a bunch of those people that are running around? You're still fighting a war, and so when we take a town or something, as soon as we took the town, because I spoke German, I didn't tell you that, I forgot. They kind of pulled me, I was not an interpreter, official interpreter, but if we took a town and it wasn't too big a town, most towns were maybe, you know, like Foston or somewhere smaller like Fisher, but if we took a bigger town, that was a different deal. Then they'd put me in a Jeep and I'd go around telling these people to get off the street. They couldn't be there. Either that or if they were DPs, I would make sure they'd round them up, tell them where to go. And we'd pick them up and we'd have to, you know, you have to take care of them. So as an infantryman, what all we did is tell them get off the street or stay here, and we turn them over to the MPs or just let them wait. We'd maybe have one guy with them. Because the MPs, that was their function. That wasn't our function to take care of people. So that's what happened. But I did, in my career, if you want to call it a career, I really dealt with a lot of DPs and people and prisoners because I spoke German. And I couldn't imagine a unit as a division is roughly 16 to 20,000 men. I would get pulled pretty often out of the foxhole, and you didn't know. You never knew what was going on. They never told you where you were at. You didn't have the slightest idea. You'd say, Bernie, come on. And they'd send a Jeep, maybe as close as you could get, and you'd walk to the Jeep and they'd drive you where you had to go. And that's what I did. When I talked about bigger towns, people here, I always said if we ever had a war here, we would collapse, just like that, as soon as they hit the East Coast. And the reason I say that, because I saw what happens. But we would take a town towards the end, and we were the people fighting. Why should we sleep in a hole in the ground? So what happened? They would send me, Bernie, see, down here, the whole block of houses. I go down one side of the street, 10 minutes, get out of the house. You think that's easy when you speak German. Tell them you got 10 minutes, take what you can carry and get out. You don't know if we're gonna stay there one night or 2 weeks or 2 months. And it varied. Sometimes we might be there a couple weeks, and that's the way we kind of had housing. Because again, you wonder whether it was the enemy or not in our country, they just about should do the same thing. Why should we sleep in a hole in the ground when our enemies got it in the house? And that's kind of the way the war went. But getting back to the civilian population, have you ever thought if we ever had a war, how are you going to eat? You don't have electricity, we don't have heat, and you don't have any cover. The one thing about Europe, most of their buildings were clay tile or stucco or brick. If they came here, look what's happening in California. They're all wood houses. Boy, they burn down in a hurry. If they hit the East Coast, those are wood houses. They be the same way. So here's the other thing that happens. When you start, one of the things I'd run into, where we started running into the population, that I don't know if the government told them, but I think what happened when they would evacuate a town, and I think I'm correct, because I did deal with the mayors of the town, they would tell these people, you're putting so many in this house, so many in this house, so you don't know who's coming to your house. But Jackie, I'm going to put you with Kathy, whether you like it or not. And I mean, you could have families, and that's what happens. So, boy, don't hope you ever get to have a war over here, because you just don't know what's going on. You have to eat. I'll tell you, you have to eat. And when people get hungry, you'd be surprised what they do. So that's what kind of happened there. But as we kept going, our unit, like I say, I get pulled out for certain things, or our unit, I ended up in the bulge. Our squad did. And I don't know, I know I dug a hole 3 times one night, a different hole, for protection. We didn't know where we were or what was going on. You just didn't know. Everything was turmoil. The one thing that we learned early, I learned how to dig a hole. I could dig a hole in a hurry. And the best part of it was, I sit up here in beet country. The first hole that I got into, foxhole, I was in a field. I didn't know what it was. It was a field of beets. Can you imagine? Yeah. But it was darn good digging in there, I'll tell you. It was as our field, it was kind of a clay. You could dig and, stand up. I mean, the walls would stand, and not like a gravel or sand pit where everything caves and you keep digging. But we always had good digging, except when we got into the bulge, to some degree, the Ardennes was pretty rocky, small rocks and stuff. That wasn't very good. You couldn't dig a very, very big hole. You're lucky you get a couple inches. You call it a slit trench. But anyhow, that's what kind of happened there. We always dug when we could, we'd dig our foxholes L-shaped. And there was a reason for it. The first night I was in a foxhole, I spent practically all night watching a weed. When you get down here and you get your eyes level, just so you're looking at the hole, you would swear that weed or whatever it is somebody. And I tell you, you were scared to death in the first place. And I know that I spent most of the night watching one weed or another weed, because we didn't know. We didn't know. They sent us out there. We didn't know where the enemy was, if they were coming or going or what. We didn't even, in fact, you never knew where your next other outfit would be. Most of the time, you'd be sitting in a hole, and all of a sudden, in the middle of the night, somebody would be shooting a machine gun next to you. You never knew they were there, because you don't see them. You don't walk around saying hello. It was a different ball game. But then there would be times at night, you could expect after midnight. November was a kind of a beautiful month, because there would be nights that'd be absolutely clear. I mean, no clouds, and the stars would be up, but you had a lot of activity till about 12 o'clock, and then it'd go deathly quiet. You couldn't believe it, but then you knew there was something wrong, because that was patrol activity. In other words, the enemy was patrolling on your lines, or we were patrolling on their lines. And the only thing there is, you learn in a hurry, and I never had to worry about it, because I think I was smart enough then. The last thing you do is pull that trigger. Why don't you pull the trigger? You ever shot a gun at night? About like sticking a flashlight in your eyes. As soon as you pull that trigger, they know where you're at. That was the same thing we talk about these movies, running around and shooting at everything and everybody running. They don't run out of ammunition ever, it seems, but the Rambo is going all over. That's the last thing you do. They do for green troops, but it isn't that kind of shooting going on. There's a lot of artillery fire. I tell you, artillery and mortars probably cause the most casualties, except if you were actually going to jump off and attack. But artillery and mortars, you don't know when they're going to happen. We could be sitting here now, they could drop a round in and blow us up. The only thing is, there's a difference. And it didn't take you long to learn the difference. Because if you were walking or something, you know whether you should hit the dirt or you shouldn't hit the dirt by a sound. And what do they tell you? If you hear it, don't worry about it. You know why? Stop the figure. But the ones you don't hear, that's the ones you should have worried about, because that's the one that got you. So you could be walking and there'd be stuff going, you know, and you could tell it was incoming or outgoing. You could always tell the difference. You could tell if it was a mortar, or you could tell if it was an artillery shell, and you didn't even hit the ground. I mean, you just automatically knew what was going on. And that didn't take long to learn, because we really got mortared. We were in an area that was really, you'd think they'd run out of ammunition. I don't know how they could, just on our little place, drop that many mortars. It was steady. I crawled out of my foxhole 11 times one day to repair my little telephone line between that and the next hole. Well, a wire isn't any bigger than the wire on your, well, it isn't even as big as the wire on your glasses. So when the mortar hits that, you know, there's a lot of mortars going around, and that's the way it was. Have you ever thought, if you're in a foxhole and all this stuff's going on, how do you go to the bathroom?
What do you do?
Yeah, you bet you learned that in a hurry. You roll out on your side. You don't get your head any higher than you have to. The same way, how do you eat? We were on our bellies for the first couple of weeks there between foxholes, because like I told you, that first town we were in, that was open field between us and the probably we were lucky if we had a half a mile between us. They were that close. If any of you have been in the military and you know what a mortar is, when you drop a mortar around in a tube, you hear a click. We could hear the Germans dropping a mortar into the tube. We could always hear it. We knew it. In fact, the weather was such in some of those months where you had a perfect day, you could hear the click, and we were spread out parallel with the road. If the weather conditions were just right, you could kind of see that mortar. You could see it. People don't believe that. You could see it because it doesn't move as fast as an artillery shell. As I explained before, a mortar goes straight up, a mortar goes up maybe 80 or 90 degrees and drops that way. Artillery shell goes up at an angle. And when an artillery shell hits the ground, it explodes at an angle. So if you're next to a mortar, and I was next to a mortar in a foxhole I had, and I'm not lying, the hole was here. The last round that they dropped, and it happened to be the last round, was right there. It wasn't this far from the edge of my hole. They could have dropped that whole tube could have dropped in my hole. It exploded. All it did is, a mortar only makes a little bit of hole in the grass, maybe a half inch at the most, and then the shrapnel goes up like this. Whereas if it was an artillery shell and it hits like this, the shrapnel goes like this, and it gets you. So you never want to be upright. You hit the dirt, and you learn that in a hurry. And the best part of it is, talk about mortars, you get caught in the open once in a while. My buddy and I were bringing ammunition to this machine gun, and we thought we were pretty safe. We're in this town, we're going between the streets, and somehow or other they knew where we were, between houses and the street. I don't know how they could see us, but they dropped some mortars in on us. And the first one probably from here to the wall went off, and it didn't get us. So I had this new replacement, he wanted to get up and run, and I grabbed him on the shoulder. And Slats, we call his name, nickname Slats. I held him down. I said, just a minute. Not a minute, we only have seconds, but anyhow, because a mortar in those days was taught over, under. So if the first one missed you there, they bracket, the next one comes short. They do it the third over, under, and the third one is supposed to get you. And usually it did. Well, anyhow, we knew enough that the first one went over, the next one was short. So we got up and ran in between just a little bit to get out of the range. Of course, we didn't get hit. So, I mean, you learn a lot of things, and you learn the hard way. Like I say, the ones that you don't hear is the ones you better worry about. But anyhow, when the war ended, maybe going too long. Okay, Phyllis? I'll cut it off.
But you may want to leave some time for some questions if people.
I'm sorry?
You may want to leave just some time for some questions.
Oh, okay. Well, anyhow, towards the end of the war, things were going pretty fast. You never really were one place too long, and like I say, people were there, so either you had to kick them out, or generally that's what happened. You know, you tell them to get out of their house. But we were headed for Berlin. Our unit ended up, we were always next to the British. In fact, I told you that we were under the command of Alexander for when the Bulge broke for about 3 weeks. Then some of us got shifted down into the Bulge. But anyhow, our orders when the war was getting close to the end, we were on the north flank of all the American armies, next to the British. So we were headed, and we didn't know it, but as we kept going, because it'd take a few days to get to Berlin. But anyhow, they stopped us dead cold in the middle of the day, one day, 48 miles from Berlin. We didn't know what was going on, because we were moving pretty good. But the agreement was between Stalin and Roosevelt that the Americans were not to take Berlin, and we were supposed to stay on the west side of the Elbe River. And if you look at a map, the Elbe River goes north and south from basically pretty much from Prague to Berlin. Well, we swung south. We went to Magdeburg, Stendal, Tangerhede, those towns which were south of Berlin. We couldn't cross the river. We sat on the river for close to 3 weeks. When I say sat on the river, on the west side of the river. That's when it was kind of nice duty, because what it amounted to, I had about myself and my officer, the only one I'd ever see. I never saw our company commander all through combat. One, in fact, the first one got killed, but even the only officer that I ever saw was my platoon leader. And you didn't see him, happen to be a him, too often, because you had your sergeants and all that. But anyhow, my platoon leader, officer, and I would make the rounds every day to a bunch of little towns around by where Stendal is, south of Magdeburg, and meet with the mayor and the people there and see what's going on. The one thing the Americans did different in World War II rather than World War I is we tried to keep the economy going. And that was the best thing that ever happened, because we didn't have the situation after World War II that we had in World War I, where the economy of Germany and Europe was so dependent on, they could make their own economy, and they did. But with us, just to show what happened, the day after the war ended, which would have been the 9th, the war ended on May 8th. And another thing that no one is aware of, we had a self-imposed armistice on May 8th within our division area. They agreed that we weren't going to do any shooting. And we pretty much did that as much as you could. Something we might have to shoot. But anyhow, we were strictly taking prisoners and civilians, because at that time, as much as they could, the Germans were fleeing the Russians, because nobody wanted to be captured, or if you want to call it captured, or shot by the Russians. So the German civilians plus the German army was crossing the river from the east to the west. And we were on the west bank, and the Russians were coming up to the east bank. They weren't there when we were there. Our unit met the Russians at Torgau. We were the first unit that met the Russians before the war ended. But anyhow, as they came across, we would take prisoners. And that would be, the dike on the Elbe was a good 10 feet high. And there weren't buildings built into the dike on the Elbe like they were on the Ruhr. So the prisoners, the people that they'd come across, the bridge was blown at Tanger Bundy or Tankerhee. I forget which one of those two cities was right at. That was blown, so they either have to swim or have a boat or a board or something to get across. And of course, the military, that was something else. The Russians were shooting at the Germans as they were trying to cross. The closer the Russians got, there were always a few Russians were ahead of the rest. They were just shooting at the Germans as they were trying to get away. And we were trying to, we were picking them up as prisoners. I think our unit, we had close to a couple 100,000 prisoners. And as far as you could see, it looked like ants. We'd have one American soldier about every quarter mile, just doing this, telling them to keep going, get them away. And that's the way the war ended, the last day. Except, I think I told you that we had kind of a self-imposed armistice. Nobody's supposed to shoot. I didn't talk about replacements. For you that were in the military, you know what a replacement is. I came in the unit, our unit was filled, our regiment, before they went overseas, was a regular Army, the 102nd again. That's why I stayed in the Army Reserves. When I got out of the Army, I stayed in the Reserves because I wanted to keep my rank. And I did. I ended up being as high as I could go as an enlisted man, but you had to stay in there. But if you start over and they draft you, you're just like a new rooster in the hen house. I mean, you can imagine what happens. We got replacements. When you train with people and are brought up with them, the new person, that wasn't the worst. Remember I told you about the 10 out of the 30 the first time? I'm going to cut it off in just a minute. But anyhow, before I went overseas, there was a Jewish kid in our squad by the name of Kleiner. My name was Leider, so generally if there's a roll call, it would be, KL, Kleiner, Leider. Well, anyhow, we went overseas, and when we got shot up, was the night we crawled in a hay barn when the English relieved us. We moved back, and we must have been practically on the front lines because we didn't know where we were. We were on that salient. But there was a hay barn, wasn't as big as this back room. Probably had a room for a couple cows like there and a horse. And then it had a step. This top part was filled with hay. Because we just got out and we didn't know where we were. And it was just about, well, by the time we got there, it was after midnight. We crawled in there. It was in an apple orchard on the edge of this little town of Gilrath. Hatteras was the other one we were in. But anyhow, they got us that night. We had crawled in, as many of us could, crawled up in the hay. And Kleiner was at my feet, because I had to arch my knees, yet I was kicking him in the head. I wouldn't have enough room. And the guy tight against me on this side and tight against me on this side. This guy was wounded. This guy was wounded. Kleiner was killed. I was in the middle. That's when I got to be a PFC, because myself and this other kid from North Dakota, Mandan, everybody took off. You were either wounded, like a flock of birds, they were gone. We were there. We pulled we pulled Kleiner out. I thought he was dead because I couldn't see it, but he had his helmet on. He had his helmet strap on. He slept. Well, we all kind of did, slept with our head in the helmet because you had a helmet liner in there that kind of protected with a little bit of cushion. But he kept his strap on, and I thought he broke his neck. I don't know. But anyhow, we dragged him out. We dragged out a couple others and propped him up against a tree and never saw him again, except I talked to him now after the war, talked to two of them. But anyhow, I got a combat infantry badge. My pay up to that time was $50 a month for 19 months. And if you see me wearing this little blue infantry rifle badge, to me that's the best thing I ever got. That was worth $10 a month. Myself and this other kid were the first two in our battalion to get a combat infantry badge. But after that, it was different. But now I think, I don't know, I think it's kind of been diminished because I think they give them out practically like Cracker Jack toys now. But originally, that was quite a thing to get. So that was worth $10. But anyhow, getting back to Kleiner, dragged Kleiner out, and I went through the rest of the war. But after Kleiner was dead, and I've got the letter from his mother at home yet, she wrote me a letter wondering how he died and if he, you know, if he was, whatever happened. Well, I wrote her back. And I think I wrote her once more after that, because I think she wrote me 2 letters. But after the war was over, we landed and came back to New York. You know, and I'm a country boy. I don't know anything about New York. But anyhow, we rented a cab. Omer and I, a kid from Mandan, rented a cab. We went to 10 J Street. Never forget that. That's where Kleiner's had their little delicatessen. And their delicatessen wasn't any bigger than this room, probably. The mother and father ran the Jewish delicatessen on J Street. So we walked in there. You know, I think it was about the second day I came back from overseas, and I told her, you know, 2 soldiers walked in there, probably scared her to death, I don't know, but anyhow, her and her husband were there. So I talked to her a little bit, and she saw my arm, and she saw I had a wristwatch on, and she went berserk. She said that was her son's wristwatch, and I stole it. I'm telling you, that was a pretty low blow. There's nothing I could do about that, except, you know, what can you tell her? Just turn around and left. But that really kind of hurt. And the reason it hurt, because here they assumed I was German heritage. And in those days, German and Jewish was like putting the cat and the dog together, pretty much, even in Minneapolis. So I couldn't help but feel that way a little bit. And I don't believe I ever had that kind of resentment. I'm not blaming her in the least, but nevertheless, how much irony could you put into that? But that was the way the war ended for me. And again, thank you very much, Phyllis, and for all the library people. And